I'm Ken Rockwell. Let's take a look at Nikon's cheap Chinese-made 50mm f2.8 macro, which is probably the worst macro lens they have ever made. On the other hand, Nikon's never made a bad macro lens. They're all optically superb. So let's first take a look at some of the pictures I can make with this lens. Here's my bicycle. Now I'm zooming in using the editing software on my computer. I'm not actually moving the camera or zooming the lens. The lens doesn't zoom. And what's critical is that, like every modern lens, it's ultra sharp, even wide open at f2.8. This is at 1/2500th of a second at auto ISO 64. And I'm zooming in here, and lenses always become their softest at the edges and corners and at the maximum aperture. So here at f2.8, off on the far side, I can still read the tiny lettering on my tires that I can't even read with my naked eye unless I put on some glasses and get really, really close. It's super sharp. So optically, that is not this lens's problem. Here's inside one of my favorite Thai restaurants. Even at f2.8, handheld at a 15th of a second at ISO 64, a lot of people misconstrue that higher ISOs are free. No, they're very expensive in terms of losing sharpness. The noise reduction inherent in every ISO above 64 softens the image just slightly. So if you can shoot at 64 and still be ultra sharp and still have no camera motion, that's the way to shoot. So this is at ISO 64, handheld using the in-camera stabilization of my Z7 Mark II, and you'll see it's sharp. Here's my lunch. Not an exciting picture. This has a compensating aperture, so wide open this close is only f4.5, but that's the case with all lenses. The good thing is that this lens actually tells you the correct aperture. This is at about half life-size reproduction ratio, meaning that the image on the sensor is half the size of the actual subject. And this is handheld at a 15th of a second, and I needed ISO 200 to be able to handhold it at a reasonable speed and not have any camera motion. Of course, nothing is in focus outside of a vapor-thin plane this close, especially when you're all the way open. Is it sharp here? Yes. Here's another shot. You would never do this in actual use. Shooting at daylight, f2.8, but this is 1/1250th of a second, again at auto ISO 64. And as I zoom in here to the corners on my 45 megapixel Z7 Mark II, you can see that optically the lens is superb. This is at f6.3, handheld at a 50th of a second at ISO 64. Again, once you start stopping these lenses down, they're all equally sharp, which is ultra sharp. Here's a slight macro shot. This is at f5.6 at a 400th at auto ISO 64. On flowers, I'm not a flower shooter, but I'm told you want to focus on what's poking out in the center, and you'll see that what actually is in focus is ultra sharp, although there really is nothing in focus. Stop down to f11 to get a little bit of depth of field. This is at a 50th of a second handheld at ISO 64. It's all super sharp. So if the optics are so great, why is this such a bad lens? Well, it's not really a bad lens. It's like if you have a class at a private school where all the kids are super smart, there always will be the dumbest kid. And this is the dumbest kid in that private school. First off, it's not made domestically in Japan. Quality was not job number one. Saving cost is. It's made in China. It's all plastic. And what is interesting is it's a stepper motor for autofocus, and you can pull it in and out because of the way it's geared. You can pull it in and out by hand. This particular lens, I can actually pull out beyond life size, so I can get to about 1.16 to 1 and get slightly larger than life size on my sensor. Not that I'd recommend that. It is all plastic on the outside. Everything is plastic that you see here. This is a metal mount, which could be aluminum or aluminium, or it might be brass. I'm not entirely sure. It seems to be mostly plastic on the inside. This is a great lens for use as a compact, lightweight, normal lens that's moderately fast at f2.8 and focuses super close for anything you might need to focus super close. I don't recommend it for macro, much as I don't recommend any lens that's 50 millimeters for macro, is because at 1:1, you're only about this close from your subject. And what happens is you can't light your subject. For instance, if I go like this, you see my hand becomes in shadow. And it's very difficult to shoot anything other than something that's flat at 1:1 life size. And guess what? If it's flat, the smart way to shoot that is to stick it in a flatbed scanner, which is another word for that combo fax copier printer that you got for $50 at the office supply store. Those have fantastic flatbed scanners in them, usually at ridiculously high resolutions. That's the way to scan flat documents or stamps or coins. Plus, the scanner has its own built-in lighting, which is usually extremely good, and everything's all flat and lined up because it sits on the cover glass. That's the way to shoot that. Once you deal with three-dimensional subjects, if you're only this close, you block your light, you annoy the subject if it's a bug or something that's alive, and you also get a really weird perspective because normally you and I don't look at things this close. We look at things much further away, even if we're looking at just a small detail. The perspective rendition of a longer, say a 100 or 200 millimeter macro lens is far superior to the rendition you get when you start getting real up close and personal with a 50 millimeter lens like this. The other real problem I have with this lens is it's not mechanical, direct, coupled, manual focus. It's purely electronic. This doesn't connect to anything. It doesn't do anything unless you're connected to your camera, where the digital encoder here talks to the computer in your camera, then your camera talks to the motor in the lens, and eventually, whenever it gets around to it, moves this focus. Now, it's only a fraction of a second that it takes to respond to turning the ring, but that tiny fraction, I'll say it's about a 10th of a second or a 30th of a second. The problem is, you may not understand it. If you're just playing around with this thing at your friend's house, you turn this, it moves in and out, it seems okay. But when you actually zoom in and you're on a tripod and you're trying to get the exact focus, there's two things wrong. Number one, any time delay means you turn it, have to wait. Turn it, have to wait. Turn it, have to wait. That really slows down your ability to shoot with this lens. It's not something I would choose for myself. And the other problem with this lens for really serious macro shooting is that the precision, in other words, the number of steps in the stepper motor doesn't seem to be enough to really get you the precision you need to find the exactly correct focus. In other words, you can get many different points. There's probably thousands of points of focus here, but even that's not enough because maybe you want to find a precise point of focus somewhere in between 2 or 3 of the steps on the stepper motor. And that's really a pain. And as you're turning this ring and you're trying to get it to move just a little bit and then it moves a little too far, I don't recommend it. So the best use of this lens is as a general purpose, shoot everything lens that just happens to get super close. The other concern I have with this lens is it's not much lens, the very big price. It's $650 United States dollars as the time of this writing in August of 2021. $650 is a lot of money, especially for a throwaway plastic lens like this. And by throwaway, I mean maybe it can be serviced, maybe it can't. It only has a 1-year warranty. It's not 5 years like Nikon used to do in the United States. They got cheap. If you really want to do macro on a Z camera, man up, pay the extra couple $100. This lens is about $997, so it's only about 58% more than the other lens, depending on how you do your math. This is a far superior lens, the 105 millimeter f2.8 macro. It has an extra control ring, a sort of buttons. In other words, these are nice features, but the main thing is you have a lot more distance between you and the subject when you're trying to shoot up close up. You're getting a better perspective rendition, and the focus works a little better. Not that much better, but a little better. If you want some budget choices for macro, the best thing to do is take your Nikon FTZ and use another lens. Probably the best choice is the 60mm f2.8, which is a current lens, the AFS 60mm f2.8, which will give you autofocus. But since you're doing manual focus, this AF Micro Nikkor, this is from about 1988. It's not an autofocus lens on the FTZ. It only does manual focus, but it's got direct, no play, instantaneous manual focus. Trust me, if you're doing manual focus for very precise macro work, this is a better lens because it's easier to focus manually, and you get all the electronic communication through the FTZ. It also has a brilliant hood. You'll notice at infinity, it's got a very deep hood, but as you focus closer, the lens comes forward a little bit, and this lens, even with its hood, has about the same or a little better, meaning longer, working distance at 1:1. Other great choices. You're much better off with the longer lens if you're a cheapskate for only about $200 today, and there's links to all these lenses and where I would get them. I get all these lenses from eBay. The 105mm autofocus lens will not autofocus on the FTZ, but that's okay because you don't need autofocus to do macro. If you're serious about macro, you're on a tripod and you're holding everything steady, and the reason for that is there's no depth of field. So if you just breathe a little bit, you're going to get out of focus. Direct mechanical manual focus, full electronic communication for about $200 for this lens. It's got the longer focal length. It focuses all the way up to 1:1. I would much prefer to shoot with this lens all day long than that 50mm plastic Z lens from somewhere else. Other beautiful choices are the classic Nikon 55 f2.8. This is a mechanical manual focus lens, so you don't have the data communication. It works great on the FTZ or any generic adapter ring. It's built to last for ages. And it has the same optical quality, if not even a little bit better, because the mechanics are going to be more properly aligned. Another great choice, again, for next to no dollars at all. This is a work of art. This is the Nikon 105mm f2.8 manual focus lens. It's got close range correction. It's got much more working distance. It only gets to half life size, however. You can use an extension tube to get to 1:1. There's no data communication, but oh boy, this is instantaneous, direct, mechanical manual focus. It's got the longer focal length, longer working distance, better perspective rendition. That's a good one. And there's links to all of these in my description of this video. Here's another great one. Again, sells for about $100. This is the 105mm f4. And the 105mm f4 actually has a built-in hood that retracts. It focuses up to half life size. It's got direct, instantaneous, mechanical manual focus. It's got the longer focal length. Much better. The current 105mm VR lens also works on the FTZ. This is Canon's original 1991 100mm f2.8 macro. It gets to 1:1. And I kid you not, if you use this Fringer EF to Nikon Z adapter, this lens autofocuses on the Z cameras. However, if you are doing just general photography and want an autofocus lens that weighs nothing, this little Chinese piece of plastic is a great little lens because it is weightless, it is compact. You've got an automatic to manual focus mode switch. You've even got a focus limiter. 0.3 to 0.16 meters is the same as 1 foot to a half a foot. That means it won't let the lens focus further away than about a foot. So if you're shooting something, it's not going to keep trying to focus on the background. It'll keep trying to focus on your foreground. As a general walk-around lens that also gives the advantage of macro, this is a great choice for that. The full review of this lens is at my website, where I cover every possible detail you could ever want to see, as well as you can download the original files for those photos I showed you at the very beginning. Thanks again for watching Ken Rockwell, kenrockwell.com, and kenrockwell.tv.